The phone rang on a Tuesday morning and I almost didn't answer it. I was sitting in my sunroom with my coffee, looking out at the garden I'd spent 20 years cultivating, when I saw the name flash across the screen. Mom. We hadn't spoken in over 3 years. Before that, it had been another 2. Our relationship had always been measured in gaps and silences, in disappointments that stretched across decades like shadows at sunset. But something made me pick up. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was that small part of me that still remembered being a little girl who wanted nothing more than to make her parents proud. "Hello," I said, my voice careful, neutral. "Margaret." My mother's voice was thin, strained in a way I'd never heard before. "We need to talk to you about something important." I waited. In the background I could hear my father's television, the same news channel he'd watched every morning for 40 years. "Your father and I are in a difficult situation," she continued. "We're going to lose the house. We can't afford the payments anymore, and we don't have anywhere to go." She paused, and I could hear her pride cracking like old porcelain. "We need your help." I took a sip of my coffee. It was good coffee, expensive. The kind I could afford now. The kind I'd worked 30 years to be able to buy without thinking twice. "Do you remember what you said to me the last time we spoke?" I asked quietly. There was a long silence. "Margaret, please, we're desperate." I looked around my home, at the life I'd built from nothing, at the success they'd said I'd never achieve. And I smiled, though there was no joy in it yet, only a strange sense of completion, like a story finally reaching its proper ending. "I'll help you," I said. "But we're going to do this my way." My name is Margaret Eleanor Hayes, and I am 72 years old. I live in a comfortable 3-bedroom house in Asheville, North Carolina, surrounded by mountains that change color with every season. I have a successful consulting business that I started in my 40s, a retirement account that will keep me comfortable for the rest of my days, and a reputation in my field that I built one careful step at a time. But I didn't start here. Nobody does. I was born in 1953 in a small town outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My father worked in the steel mills. My mother worked at home, raising me and my younger brother, Daniel. We weren't poor, but we weren't rich either. We were the kind of family where every dollar was counted, where practicality was valued above all else, where dreams were considered luxuries we couldn't afford. From the time I was young, I loved to draw. I would fill notebooks with sketches, designs, ideas. I dreamed of becoming an artist, maybe a designer. I wanted to create beautiful things that would make people happy. But every time I showed my parents my drawings, I got the same response. "That's nice, dear," my mother would say, barely glancing at the page. "But you need to focus on your real schoolwork." My father was more direct. "Art doesn't pay the bills, Maggie. You need a practical skill, something reliable." They wanted me to become a teacher or a secretary. Something stable, something safe, something that wouldn't embarrass them at church or in front of the neighbors. My brother Daniel was different. He was good at sports, charming, the kind of son who made parents swell with pride at Little League games and school assemblies. He could do no wrong in their eyes. When he announced he wanted to be a lawyer, they beamed. That was ambitious. That was respectable. That was worth supporting. I graduated high school in 1971 and enrolled in a local community college to study business. Not because I wanted to, but because it was what they'd allow. My father had made it clear he would only help pay for college if I chose something sensible. Art school wasn't even a conversation. It was dismissed before I could finish the sentence. So I studied business and hated every minute of it. But I was good at it, the way you can be good at something when you have no other choice. I learned about accounting, management, marketing. I learned how businesses worked, how money flowed, how to read people and situations. I didn't know it then, but I was building a foundation I would need later. I met Robert Hayes in 1973 in my business law class. He was kind, steady, and he actually listened when I talked about my ideas. We married in 1975, a small ceremony at my parents' church. My mother cried, but not from joy. She cried because I'd chosen a courthouse civil ceremony instead of the full Catholic Mass she'd wanted. Another disappointment. Robert and I moved to Charlotte, where he'd gotten a job as an accountant. I found work as an office manager for a small manufacturing company. It was fine. It paid the bills. It was exactly the kind of practical, reliable life my parents had prescribed. But I was miserable. Every day felt the same. Wake up, go to work, come home, make dinner, watch television, go to bed. On weekends, I would sit in our tiny apartment and sketch in secret, like it was something shameful. Robert knew and he was kind about it, but even he didn't really understand. Nobody did. The years passed like water through a sieve. We couldn't have children, though we tried. That was another disappointment for my parents, another way I'd failed to meet expectations. My mother had wanted grandchildren desperately, and Daniel's wife had fertility issues too. But somehow, when Daniel and his wife remained childless, it was a tragedy. When Robert and I remained childless, it was just another mark against me. I threw myself into my work. I moved up from office manager to administrative director. I learned every aspect of the business. I saw inefficiencies everywhere and began suggesting improvements. Some were implemented. The company grew. But I was still just an employee, still living within someone else's vision. In 1985, when I was 32 years old, something shifted inside me. Robert and I were visiting my parents for Thanksgiving, and my father was talking about Daniel. Daniel the lawyer. Daniel who'd just made junior partner at his firm in Philadelphia. Daniel who'd bought a beautiful house in the suburbs. Now that's success, my father said, gesturing with his fork. A man who's made something of himself. My mother nodded enthusiastically. We're so proud. He's really made us proud. I'd been working 60-hour weeks. I just successfully negotiated a major contract that saved my company hundreds of thousands of dollars, but that wasn't the kind of success they could brag about at church. What about you, Maggie? My father asked, almost as an afterthought. Still pushing papers at that factory? Something inside me cracked. I'm thinking of starting my own business, I said quietly. The table went silent. My mother's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. What kind of business? My father asked, his tone already skeptical. Business consulting. I could help small companies improve their operations, streamline their processes. I've been doing it unofficially at my current job for years. My father laughed. Actually laughed. Maggie, that's ridiculous. You don't have the experience for that. And besides, women don't run those kinds of businesses. Robert, my mother said, turning to my husband, surely you're not supporting this foolishness. Robert looked uncomfortable. We're just discussing options. You need to talk some sense into her, my father interrupted. She's got a good job. Steady income. Why would she throw that away to play businesswoman? It's not playing, I said, my voice harder than I'd intended. I've been studying the market. I've been taking night classes and consulting methodology. I have a business plan. A business plan, my father repeated mockingly. You sound like Daniel. Except Daniel actually has the credentials and the intelligence to back it up. That was the moment. That was when something inside me broke and reformed into something stronger. I'm going to do this, I said. Then you're a fool, my father said. And don't come crying to us when it fails. We warned you. We've always tried to guide you toward a sensible path, but you never listen, you never have. My mother shook her head sadly. You were always the difficult one, Margaret. Always wanting to be different, to stand out. Pride comes before a fall, you know. We left before dessert. Robert drove home in silence while I stared out the window, tears streaming down my face. But they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of rage and determination. I'm doing it, I told Robert. I'm starting the business. He reached over and squeezed my hand. I know you are, and I believe in you, even if they don't. The next 5 years were the hardest of my life. I gave notice at my job in January of 1986, and my boss tried to talk me out of it. He offered me a raise, a promotion, anything to stay. But I'd made my decision. I started Hayes Consulting Services from our spare bedroom. I had one phone line, a used desk I'd bought at a yard sale, and a dream that everyone except Robert thought was foolish. The first year I made almost nothing. I took on any client I could find, even if the job was small. I helped a local bakery reorganize their inventory system. I advised a struggling hardware store on their pricing structure. I worked 16-hour days and made less than I would have at a minimum wage job. But I was learning. Every project taught me something new. Every challenge made me sharper, and slowly word began to spread. The bakery's profits increased. The hardware store stayed in business. People started calling. My parents didn't call, not once. Not to ask how the business was going, not to offer support, not even to say they were thinking of me. The silence was its own kind of message. Daniel called occasionally, usually when he needed something or wanted to brag about his latest success. He'd made full partner. He'd won a big case. His firm was expanding. I'd congratulate him, and he'd ask how my little project was going, his tone just condescending enough to sting. "Mom and Dad are worried about you, you know," he said during one call in 1987. "They think you've made a huge mistake. Dad says it's embarrassing when people at church ask about you and he has to explain that you're unemployed." "I'm not unemployed," I said carefully. "I own a business." "A business that's not making any money," Daniel countered. "Look, Maggie, I'm just trying to help. Maybe it's time to admit this isn't working and find a real job. There's no shame in trying and failing. Well, there's some shame, but at least you could say you learned your lesson." I hung up on him. It was the first time I'd ever done that, and it felt powerful. By 1990, my business had turned a corner. I had steady clients, reliable income, and a reputation for solving problems other consultants couldn't. I'd hired my first employee, a young woman named Sarah who just graduated from business school. Robert and I bought a house, nothing fancy, but it was ours. We were comfortable. I sent my parents a Christmas card that year with a photo of our new house. I wanted them to see that I'd succeeded despite their predictions. I wanted them to be proud, or at least to acknowledge that I'd been right. My mother called on December 28th. "We got your card," she said, her voice cold. "That's a nice house." "Thank you," I said, waiting. "Your father and I were talking, and we wanted to tell you something. We know you think you've proven us wrong with this business of yours. But success isn't just about money, Margaret. It's about character. It's about family. It's about doing things the right way." My chest tightened. "What are you saying, Mom?" "I'm saying that we're proud of Daniel because he achieved his success through legitimate means. He went to law school. He earned his position through hard work and education. You're just making it up as you go along. It's not the same thing." "I've been working 18-hour days for 5 years," I said, my voice shaking. "I built this from nothing. How is that not hard work?" "Don't raise your voice to me, Margaret. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You've always had an attitude problem. Always thought you were smarter than everyone else. Pride is a sin, you know." "And love is supposed to be patient and kind," I shot back. "But I guess that doesn't apply to parents, does it?" She hung up on me. We didn't speak again for 3 years. In 1993, I landed my biggest client yet, a mid-sized manufacturing company that was struggling with efficiency issues. I spent 6 months analyzing their operations, implementing new systems, training their management team. When I was done, they'd cut costs by 30% and increased productivity by 45%. They paid me more for that one project than I'd made in my entire first year of business. I was proud. I was successful. I was everything they'd said I'd never be. But I was also alone in my triumph. No parents to celebrate with. No family dinners where they'd brag about my accomplishments the way they did about Daniel's. Just Robert and Sarah, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing I'd been right. Then in 1995, Robert was diagnosed with cancer. Pancreatic, advanced. The doctors gave him 6 months. He lived for 8 months, and I spent every moment I could by his side. My business suffered. I turned down clients. I lost contracts. But I didn't care. Robert had believed in me when no one else did. He'd stood by me through the hardest years. He deserved every second I could give him. My parents came to the funeral. They sat in the back row and left immediately after without speaking to me. Daniel gave a brief eulogy about what a good man Robert had been, though he'd barely known him. At the reception afterward, my mother approached me stiffly. I'm sorry for your loss, she said, the words formal and cold. Are you? I asked. She blinked, taken aback. Of course I am. He was your husband. You never liked him. You thought I married beneath me, remember? You said he'd hold me back from making something of myself. Ironic since he's the only person who ever believed I could. Margaret, this isn't the time. When is the time, Mom? When is the right time for you to actually see me? To actually acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, I know what I'm doing with my life? She pressed her lips into a thin line. You're being dramatic. We've always wanted what's best for you. No, I said quietly. You've always wanted what looked best to everyone else. There's a difference. She turned and walked away. My father followed without a word. I didn't see them again for 7 years. Grief is a strange teacher. In the year after Robert died, I learned more about myself than I had in the previous 42 years combined. I learned that I was stronger than I thought. I learned that I could survive loss and keep going. I learned that the business I'd built was more than just proof that my parents were wrong, it was something I genuinely loved, something that gave my life meaning and purpose. I threw myself into work with renewed focus. I expanded the business. I hired more employees. I took on bigger clients. I refined my methods and developed proprietary systems that made me sought after in my industry. By the time I was 50, I had 12 employees and clients in 3 states. By 55, I'd been featured in business magazines and asked to speak at conferences. By 60, I'd started teaching courses at the local university on business management and organizational efficiency. I wasn't just successful. I was respected. I was known. I moved to Asheville in 2015, drawn by the mountains and the artistic community and the sense of peace I found there. I bought my house with cash. I filled it with beautiful furniture and original artwork and all the things I dreamed of having as a young woman. I hired a gardener at first, but then discovered I loved doing it myself, creating living beauty with my own hands. I made friends, real friends who valued me for who I was. I joined a book club and a hiking group. I volunteered at the local women's shelter teaching financial literacy classes. I built a life that was full and rich and entirely my own. And I tried not to think about my parents. But you can't run from ghosts forever. I heard through a cousin that Daniel's law practice had collapsed in 2018. Bad investments, client complaints, partnership disputes. He'd lost everything and had to start over. My parents never mentioned it to me, of course. I only knew because family gossip travels even through the widest rifts. I also heard that my parents had retired with less money than they'd planned. My father's pension wasn't as much as he'd expected. They'd refinanced their house multiple times and still had a substantial mortgage. They were in their late 80s now, and the stairs in their split-level home were becoming difficult. I felt a twinge of something when I heard that. Not quite sympathy, but not quite satisfaction either. Just a strange hollowness, like looking at old photographs of people you used to know. Then came the phone call. That Tuesday morning in September of 2023, when my mother's voice cracked with desperation and pride swallowed whole. After I told her I'd help, she started crying, actual tears which I'd almost never heard from her. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, Margaret. I know we don't deserve." "No," I interrupted gently. "You don't. But we're going to talk about that. All of it. Every single thing that was said and done and ignored. If I'm going to do this, we're doing it my way. With honesty. With consequences. With acknowledgement of what happened between us." "Anything," she said. "Whatever you need." I paused, looking out at my garden, at the life I'd built stone by stone, triumph by triumph, despite every obstacle they'd placed in my path. "I'll call you back tomorrow," I said. "I need to think about how we're going to do this." That night, I barely slept. I lay in my comfortable bed in my beautiful home and I thought about that young woman who'd sat at her parents' Thanksgiving table 38 years ago, who'd dared to dream of something more, who'd been mocked and dismissed and told she'd fail. I thought about every hour I'd worked while they never called, every success I'd celebrated alone, every time I'd needed a parent's support and gotten only silence. And I thought about what justice looked like. Not revenge. I'd long ago learned that revenge is empty, that it satisfies nothing and helps no one. But justice, acknowledgement, truth. By morning, I knew what I was going to do. I called my mother back at exactly 9 o'clock the next morning. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice calm and clear. I'm going to pay off your mortgage. I'm going to sell your house and use the proceeds to set you up in a comfortable assisted living facility. I'm going to cover all your expenses for the rest of your lives. You'll have everything you need and you'll never have to worry about money again. I could hear her sharp intake of breath, the relief flooding through the phone line. But, I continued, there are conditions. Conditions. First, we're going to have a conversation. A real one. You and Dad and me sitting down together and we're going to talk about everything. Every hurtful thing that was said. Every time you dismissed me or compared me to Daniel or told me I was making a mistake. We're going to acknowledge what happened between us. There was a long pause. Margaret, I don't think that's necessary. It is necessary. For me. If you want my help, this is part of it. Another pause. Then, quietly, all right. Second, the assisted living facility I choose will be paid for through a trust that I control. You'll have complete access to all the amenities, all the services, everything you need. But the monthly bills will come with a note that says who's paying for them. Every single month, you'll be reminded that the failure you dismissed is the person taking care of you. That seems cruel, my mother said, her voice small. No, I replied. Cruel was telling your daughter she'd never amount to anything. This is simply honesty. You're living on my success. The success you said would never happen. I want that truth present every day. What else? She asked, and I could hear she was crying again. Third, you're going to write me a letter. A real letter, not an email. You're going to tell me what you're sorry for. Specific things. Actual apologies for actual actions. I don't want platitudes or vague regrets. I want acknowledgement of what you did and how it affected me. And if we do all this, you'll help us? Yes, I said. I'll help you. Because unlike you, I believe that love means showing up even when it's hard. Even when the other person doesn't deserve it. Even when you've been hurt. The conversation happened 2 weeks later in a quiet conference room at a local library, neutral territory. My father looked older than I remembered, shrunken somehow, his authority diminished by age and circumstance. My mother's hands shook as she poured water from a pitcher. Thank you for meeting with us, my father said stiffly. Dad, I said, pulling out a notebook I'd prepared. I want to talk about Thanksgiving 1985. Do you remember what you said to me? He frowned. That was a long time ago. You called me a fool. You said I'd never succeed at business. You told Robert he needed to talk sense into me. You compared me to Daniel and said he had the intelligence and credentials that I lacked. My father's face reddened. I was trying to protect you. The business world is harsh, especially for women. I didn't want you to get hurt. That's not what it was, I said quietly. If it was protection, you would have said, this is risky, but I believe in you. You didn't say that. You said I would fail. There's a difference between concern and condemnation. My mother spoke up. We always wanted what was best for you. No, I said more firmly now. You wanted what looked best to your friends at church. You wanted a daughter you could brag about in the same way you bragged about Daniel. You wanted me to fit into a box that made sense to you. When I didn't, you decided I was the problem. That's not fair, my father protested. I pulled out a stack of papers from my bag. These are articles about me. Magazine features. Speaking engagement announcements. Awards I've won in my field. Did you know about any of these? They stared at the papers in silence. I'm not asking if you read them, I continued. I'm asking if you even knew they existed. Did you ever even once Google my name? Did you ever ask anyone how I was doing? Did you care at all about my success as long as it wasn't the kind of success you could understand? My mother's eyes filled with tears. We're sorry. We're so sorry, Margaret. We made mistakes. We didn't understand what you were doing, and instead of trying to understand, we judged you. We were wrong. When Robert died, I said, my voice breaking slightly, You came to the funeral and left without saying more than 10 words to me. Do you know what that felt like? To bury the only person who'd ever truly supported me, and to have my own parents treat me like a stranger? We didn't know what to say, my father said quietly. We'd been apart for so long and we were ashamed. We knew we'd failed you. We knew we should have been better parents. But we didn't know how to fix it, so we just stayed away. It was the most honest thing I'd ever heard him say. We talked for 3 hours. They apologized, and I told them how much they'd hurt me. They tried to explain, and I helped them understand why their explanations didn't excuse what they'd done. It wasn't easy. There were tears and raised voices and long silences. But it was real. It was true. And when it was over, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades, the possibility of peace. 2 months later, I arranged everything. I paid off their mortgage, $87,000 remaining on a house they'd lived in for 40 years. I hired a real estate agent and an estate sale company to help them sort through a lifetime of possessions. I toured 5 different assisted living facilities and chose the best one, Meadowbrook Senior Living, a beautiful community with independent living apartments, full-service amenities, and an excellent reputation. The apartment I selected for them had 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, a living room with a view of gardens, and access to all the facility's services, meals, housekeeping, activities, transportation, medical assistance. It cost $6,500 per month for both of them. I set up a trust that would pay for their care for the rest of their lives. I calculated their life expectancy, added a buffer for inflation and unexpected costs, and funded it with enough money to ensure they'd never worry again. It was just over $500,000. But every month when the bill was paid, they received a statement. At the top, in clear print, it said, "Paid by Margaret Eleanor Hayes on behalf of Walter and Patricia Hayes." And every month they had to sign a receipt acknowledging that they'd received the statement. It wasn't about humiliation, it was about truth. They were living comfortable lives because of the daughter they'd called a failure. That truth needed to be present, acknowledged, remembered. The letters came 6 weeks after they moved in. 2 letters, one from each parent, handwritten on nice stationery. My father's letter was 3 pages long. He apologized for his harsh words, for his lack of faith, for comparing me unfavorably to Daniel. He admitted that his own fears and insecurities had shaped how he treated me. He acknowledged that he'd been wrong about my abilities, my intelligence, and my capacity for success. He said he was proud of me, and that he should have said it decades ago. My mother's letter was longer. She apologized for being cold, for caring more about appearances than about my happiness, for not defending me when my father was critical. She admitted that she'd always been jealous of my courage to pursue my dreams when she'd given up her own dreams so young. She acknowledged that I'd been right and she'd been wrong, and that no amount of apology could give me back the years of support I deserved. Both letters ended the same way. "Thank you for being a better daughter than we were parents. Thank you for your grace and generosity. We don't deserve it, but we're grateful for it." I read those letters 3 times and then put them in a box with other important documents. They mattered. They were real. They were acknowledgement, finally, of everything I'd needed to hear for 38 years. I visit my parents once a month now. It's more than they visited me in 30 years, but I'm trying to be better than the example they set. They've settled into Meadowbrook fairly well. My father plays cards in the common room and watches his news channels. My mother has made friends with several other women and attends a weekly Bible study. They seem content, or as content as people can be when they're facing the end of their lives. Our relationship is cordial but not warm. We're polite. We have pleasant conversations about the weather and the facility's activities and current events. But there's a distance between us that decades of hurt built, and I don't know if that will ever fully heal. And I'm okay with that. Daniel visits them occasionally, though not as often as I do. His career has recovered somewhat. He works as a consultant now, ironically enough, helping lawyers with practice management. He's never apologized to me directly, but he stopped making snide comments about my little project. That's probably the closest to acknowledgement I'll ever get from him. Last month, Meadowbrook held a family day where residents could introduce their visiting family members and talk about their lives. I went more out of obligation than desire. My father stood up during the sharing time, leaning on his walker, and gestured for me to stand beside him. "I want to introduce my daughter Margaret," he said to the assembled residents and families. "She's a business consultant. She owns her own company and has built it from nothing into something remarkable. She's been written about in magazines and she teaches at the university." His voice wavered slightly. I wasn't always supportive of her choices. I thought I knew better and I was wrong. But despite that, despite everything, she's here. She's taking care of us. She's shown us what real success looks like, not just making money, but having character. Being kind even when others weren't kind to you. Being generous even when others weren't generous to you. He looked at me, his old eyes watery. "I'm proud of you, Maggie. I should have said it 40 years ago, but I'm saying it now. I'm proud of you." The room was silent. I felt my throat tighten, felt tears building behind my eyes. It wasn't enough. It couldn't erase the years of dismissal and hurt. But it was something. It was acknowledgement, public and clear, from a man who'd spent his life being too proud to admit when he was wrong. "Thank you, Dad," I said quietly. My mother reached over and squeezed my hand. For just a moment, we were a family again. Not the family we should have been, but the family we were becoming. Imperfect, scarred, but trying. After the event, one of the other residents, a woman named Dorothy who'd become friendly with my mother, pulled me aside. "Your mother talks about you constantly," she said, smiling. "She's so proud of what you've accomplished. She shows everyone the articles about you that she prints from the internet." I blinked in surprise. "She does?" "Oh yes. She keeps a whole scrapbook. She's been collecting them for years, apparently. She shows it to anyone who'll look." That evening, I asked my mother about it. She looked embarrassed. "I started keeping track of you about 15 years ago," she admitted. "I'd search your name online every few months, see what you were doing. I'd print the articles and put them in a book. I wanted to know what was happening in your life, even though I was too proud and too ashamed to reach out." "You've been following my career for 15 years?" I asked, stunned. "Longer than that, really. But the internet made it easier." She looked down at her hands, which were spotted with age. "I knew what I'd lost. I knew what we'd thrown away with our stubbornness and our pride. I saw you succeeding and thriving and becoming this remarkable woman, and I knew we'd missed it all. That we'd chosen to miss it because we couldn't admit we were wrong." "Why didn't you reach out?" I asked. "Why did it take losing everything to finally call me?" "Because I'm a coward," she said simply. "Because I was ashamed. Because the longer I waited, the harder it became. And because I convinced myself you were better off without us, that you'd built a good life despite us and you didn't need us anymore." "I didn't need you," I agreed. "But I wanted you. There's a difference." She nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I know. And I'm so sorry." We sat together in silence for a while, the weight of decades settling around us like dust. "I don't know if I've fully forgiven them. Forgiveness is complicated when the hurt is so deep, so long-lasting. But I've made my peace with what happened. I found my justice, not through revenge or cruelty, but through the simple truth of my success and their dependence on it. Every month when they see that statement, when they're reminded that the failure they dismissed is now their caretaker, that's justice enough. And more than that, I've proven something to myself. I've proven that I can be generous even when others weren't generous to me. That I can show up even when others disappeared. That I can break the cycle of conditional love and offer something better even if it's not perfect. I'm 72 years old now, and I've learned some things about success that my parents never taught me. The first thing is that success isn't about proving other people wrong. For years, I thought that was my motivation, to show my parents they were wrong about me, to demonstrate that I could succeed despite their lack of faith. But that kind of success is hollow. It's achievement built on spite, and spite is poor foundation for a life. Real success is building something that matters to you, regardless of who's watching or applauding. It's creating value, helping others, doing work that makes you proud when you lie down at night. The fact that my success eventually proved my parents wrong was just a side benefit, not the point. The second thing I learned is that you can't control how others see you. You can only control how you see yourself. I spent too many years waiting for my parents to validate me, to see my worth, to acknowledge that I'd made the right choices. And in doing so, I gave them power over my self-worth that they didn't deserve to have. When I finally stopped caring about their approval, when I built my life for myself rather than in opposition to their expectations, that's when I became truly free, and ironically, that's when I became truly successful. The third thing is that being the bigger person isn't about being a doormat. Some people think that grace and generosity mean accepting poor treatment or pretending that harm never happened. But that's not what I did. I helped my parents, yes, but I did it on my terms. I required acknowledgement. I demanded truth. I set boundaries. Grace doesn't mean accepting abuse. It means choosing to respond with dignity rather than cruelty, with honesty rather than revenge. My parents hurt me deeply. They failed me in fundamental ways that parents should never fail their children, and I'll carry those scars for the rest of my life. But I chose not to let those scars define me. I chose not to become bitter or cruel. I chose not to abandon them the way they abandoned me. Not because they deserved my help, but because I deserve to be the kind of person who helps anyway. That's the real victory. Not the money I made, not the business I built, not even the public acknowledgement from my father at Meadowbrook. The real victory is that I became someone I'm proud to be, someone who faces rejection and keeps going, someone who experiences hurt and chooses kindness anyway, someone who succeeds not to prove others wrong, but to prove herself right. If you're reading this or listening to this and you've experienced something similar, I want you to know something. If your parents didn't support you, if your family dismissed your dreams, if the people who should have believed in you chose not to, it's not your fault. You didn't fail them. They failed you. But their failure doesn't have to define your future. You can build something beautiful and meaningful and successful regardless of their doubts. You can prove yourself right without needing them to admit they were wrong. You can live well, love deeply, and create value in the world despite the foundation they didn't give you. And someday, if they come back to you needing help, you'll have a choice to make. You can turn away, which would be justified, or you can help them, but on your terms, with honesty and boundaries and self-respect. Either way, make the choice that lets you sleep peacefully at night. Make the choice that aligns with who you want to be, not who they made you feel like you were. Because at the end of the day, success isn't measured by bank accounts or titles, or even by proving people wrong. It's measured by whether you're proud of the person you see in the mirror, whether you built a life that matters, whether you were kind when you could have been cruel, honest when you could have been bitter, generous when you could have been petty. I look in the mirror now, at 72, and I'm proud of what I see. Not a failure, not a disappointment, not someone who lived down to low expectations. I see a woman who built something remarkable from nothing, who faced doubt and dismissal and kept going anyway, who learned that the only approval that truly matters is the approval you give yourself, and who chose grace over revenge, truth over spite, and generosity over bitterness. That's my success. That's my victory, and it's something my parents never taught me, but I learned anyway. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's simply living well, succeeding on your own terms, and when the people who doubted you need help, helping them anyway, but making sure they know exactly who's helping them and why. That's not cruelty, that's just truth, and truth, in the end, is the most powerful justice of all. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more tales of justice and redemption, because everyone deserves to hear stories about people who were underestimated, overlooked, and dismissed, and who succeeded anyway.